I'm privileged to open the panel Prostitution Worldwide today. We have with us six speakers, six wonderful women from 6 different countries. They are sex trade survivors, activists, researchers, writers, support workers, and they have one thing in common: they are changing the world. Today, they will share with us their knowledge about the sex trade under different legal systems and how we can fight it. Our first speaker is the most famous sex trade survivor in the world since Andrea Dworkin, the author of the best-selling book Paid For, and a founder of the global survivors group Space International, Rachel Moran.
I want to talk today about the things that we get right in this movement and some of the things that we get wrong. There's no way that I'm going to get through this without being emotional, so I may as well start as I mean to go on. I have something to tell you that in one fairly large part of my heart, I really don't want to say. But, you know, I've come to a point in my life where I feel that I have to step out of my role in Space International. It's not because, and I'm really glad and grateful to have the opportunity to say this to feminist women directly to your faces, because when I step out of my role at the end of this year, I have no doubt that there'll be questions and comments and probably rumours, and I want to be able to tell women up front and directly why I'm leaving. And that, I suppose, hooks into the things I want to talk about, the stuff that we get wrong in this movement. I was thinking about this morning. I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I haven't slept since. And I think I figured something out for myself. I had never thought about things in this way before. I think that that the grief that we carry as survivors, irrespective of whether we're in the sex trade survivors wing of this movement, or domestic violence, the rape relief shelters, when you look at these different areas of feminist activism, like DV, for example, a huge amount of women go into volunteering and working professionally in that sector because they know through the experiences of their own lives exactly what domestic violence is as an experience. And the same is true, of course, for the rape relief shelters, and obviously for the sex trade survivors wing of this movement. We're made up entirely of survivors. And I think the thing that I figured out for myself is that grief is actually, it bears some relationship to love, in the respect that love needs a home. And this is why bereavement is so hard, because it's just love, it's love that's been rendered homeless. And grief, I think, is the same thing. Grief needs a home too. And what that looks like in our movements, there's no nice way to say it. It looks like bullying. It expresses itself in a lot of very intense, unfair, ugly ways. There aren't any of us, myself included, who are immune to that. I've acted harshly at times and looked back and not been proud of some of the ways that I behaved, some of the ways that I've handled situations. After all this time, and it's been more than 10 years now, about 11 or 12 years, I never really know when to pinpoint the beginning of my activism in the survivors wing of this movement, because it kind of happened in stages, you know. But after all this time, I've come to look at my life in a way that I have to, at this point, understand that my life has independent value, and that I cannot continue to put myself in the firing line every day of the week on the rough and blunt end of other women's grief. You know, and I feel intensely sad to be saying this because I love every one of these women. I have been very, very lucky and fortunate in this movement in some respects. I've made lifelong friends. The Survivors of Space International in particular, I love every last one of them. But when you're in a role that necessitates you're meeting new women all the time, like a kaleidoscope, just changing all the time, there are situations that have just become so persistent and so monumental that I know that my mental health is on the line. You know, I can't remember whether it was Orwell or who it was who wrote that, you know, your masters, and I'm paraphrasing now, by those you're not allowed to criticize. I had my 8-week-old baby in my arms at the time. I had a baby in the summer of 2020. That was a surprise, I can tell you, in my mid-40s. Especially given his older brother is 28 years of age. Now, if ever you heard of a gap bigger than that, please tell me about it, because I'd like to know. I was out to Dare, standing in a shop, like about 36 hours before he was born. And I was having a chat with the woman behind the counter in Dublin. She said to me, "Oh, you're about to go any minute." I said, "I am, yeah." And I told her, you know, about the gap. And she looked at me, her face just pure horror, you know what I mean? Like I told her the most horrifying thing she'd ever heard. I think that was the moment when it really hit me, you know, what was the severity of what was happening. But so I want people to know, I want the women of this movement to know a few different things here. First of all, I will never walk out of this movement. What I'm doing is walking out of my current role for the sake of my mental and emotional and spiritual well-being. That's what I'm doing. And I'm very, very glad to see that I am shifting out of a wing of a movement that looks very, very different to what it looked like 10, 11 years ago, because it has grown like weeds all over the place. Amelia, who was mentioned earlier, is a good friend of mine. I'll be seeing her in Berlin next month. We've got individuals and organizations and new groups popping up all over the place. We've made very, very significant gains in the last 10 years. This work can be so hard and so demoralizing that it can be hard to keep an eye on the progress that you've made. But in this last decade, we've won 7 or 8 different nations. I've stopped counting them, Israel being the most recent. And we are making strides, we are making moves. And I'm really, really glad to see that walking into a movement that was not too far off the vibration that you'd feel in an empty room has switched completely and entirely, and feels now like it's a room like this one, you know, a well-stocked auditorium. So I want to say thank you to everybody who's been a part of this for me, and I really do appreciate you giving me the space to tell you all what's going on. So thank you.
Our next speaker will be a fierce Ukrainian survival leader who came to FiLiA from a war zone, Yullia Dorokhova. Thank you.
I'm Yullia Dorokhova, a sex trade survivor, an activist and lawyer from Ukraine. After leaving the sex industry, I acquired an illegal education and decided to dedicate the rest of my life into the goals helping my sister and who's still entrapped in the prostitution and change public perfection towards the sex industrial. We founded the first organization of women in prostitution in Ukraine, all Ukrainian legally alive. We managed to drive public attention to our problems and situation in sex industry in Ukraine. For last 8 months, I have seen in my country, Ukrainian occupied bombs and blading. While in deadly war, everyone, it's huge, the work and the huge more. Impoverished women and women in prostitutions are the most vulnerable. According to the UN and public sector estimates, there are about 100,000 women, 100,000. It's too much in prostitutions in the country, and an unknown number of Ukrainian women trafficked abroad before the war. Individuality prostitutions and administrative offense in Ukrainian. We have Article 181 imposes in the Fein for an engagement in prostitutions. Dependently, the minor from a little money, 51 hryvnia to 170 hryvnia. This is per $1 for $4. It's little money. Yet has a colossal negative impact on another reasons. Often, who police use the fine this as way to blading and extort women. Let's imagine the police dating a woman from the small village or town. The police officer can tell her, work for me now, or we will inform your local council and your family about your involvement in prostitutions. Such a woman become a sex slave. I think you understand women did not go to the courts because of high legal costs. They also did not report case of rape, blackmail, extortion. They know that the police would not protect them. Even those the maintenance and brothels of pimping in criminal offense in Ukrainian. The state power strikers included politicians and protect the owners of shadow business because this is received huge profits from the prostitution. The sex trade is travel and legal market. In 2018 became the death of the trap of the woman. The Russian occupied forces deployed in the occupied area included the demand of prostitution. The local women found themselves provided prostitution service in the exchange. They protected from rape, protected from robbery, murder, and other. Soldiers' demand for sexual service is always higher, and they have the money. Impoverished women from other regions of Ukraine traveling to army and living from prostitutions. It's what's not safe. There were cases when girls did not return, but we did not manage to find them. Most likely they were killed. After the Russian invasion in February, a large part of Ukraine became a war zone. Even before the war, quite a few women and Ukrainian sex workers, which it's dangerous. But they learned, they survived the example. They got to know the local sex customers and learned who is safe and who to become off. In wartime, even the non-occupied area, the socialist fabrics has changed because the local have left and new people have arrived, refuge soldiers and civility defense. Women in prostitution are not safe with them. Violent rape and murders case of the women in prostitution and are gone up. The police are indifferent. The case in the face of the mass killing across Ukrainian. During the last 8 months of the war, more than 5 million, now it's more, the 5 million citizens left Ukraine and the refuge, most of the women and children. In some case, hosts blackmailed in the women into exchange the sex houses in European and England too. For example, recently the police recused the Ukrainian refugees and her 2 children from house in Bradford about 4 weeks ago. He locked her and his children in house, and he locked the children in house and would not let me out. He controlled his physical and controlled his money in the bank. We recorded the disappearance of the woman in boards of Ukrainian. Slave trade, who presentation to help cross in the boards, put women in the car and took their documents from them, and this is woman disappear forever. They fell into a slave and were sold in the illegal brothels or individuals. There are many offers in darknet of selling young enslaved Ukrainians. Example, when you go to the darknet, can the buy of the Ukrainian sex slaver included children? A lot of proposition, like 15 years old Ukrainian girl or rent. A price varies from $3,000 for $5,000–6,000 per month. The Deutsche newspaper NRC published an article about the policy that Sweden and Norway uncovered the legal network of women of sale, from Ukrainian. Women who agree to the prostitution overseas are also victims of exploitation. The living in condition are horrendous. The pimps, they take most of their money and they are not free to live. Many forced into a street prostitutions. You know which is most dangerous. How can the atrocities? I think the occupation and destroy of Ukraine must stop just now, immediately. But this will not immediately stop the traffic of women, it's in not outside the country. I lost hope in the situation in feminist organization like the FiLiA. We are a voice in the world, the voice of women in prostitutions who disappeared in occupied area, the voice of the women kidnapped while trained, escaped from the combat zone and traffic in prostitutions, the voice of women raped for housing. Many Ukrainian women have stayed in foreign in the country, not know their language, law, and like information about where you can get protected leads the safe outcome. Dear sister, let's unite our efforts. Only together, supported each other, will be overcome and challenge.
Yullia mentioned that feminist groups like FiLiA are our last hope, and I can understand why, because when atrocities happen, you expect some help from human rights NGOs. But let's talk one minute about human rights NGOs. Let's take Amnesty International as an example. Amnesty International supported the full decriminalization of the sex trade a few years ago, including brothel owners and sex buyers, pimps, everybody. And the same Amnesty International blamed Ukraine this year for the murder of its citizens. I have written it down. This is the status by Amnesty, the tweet. Ukrainian forces have put civilians in harm's way by establishing bases and operating weapon systems in populated residential areas. So, an international human rights organization is fighting for Putin and pimps. This is where we are now. Our next speaker is a support worker from the legendary Vancouver Rape Relief. She works, everybody loves Vancouver Rape Relief, right? So she works with victims of the sex trade. Sonam Khangura.
I have been a member of Vancouver Rape Relief since 2017, but my introduction to the organization started when I had called the crisis line myself for support after being raped when I was 17. A few years later, I decided I wanted to be involved in the same crisis center that helped me. We operate a 24-hour crisis line and a shelter for women who are escaping violence. We are the longest standing rape crisis center in Canada, and next year we will be turning 50. Our services are available to any woman who has experienced any form of male violence, including wife battering, rape, sexual assault, sexual harassment, incest, and prostitution. This violence can be historical, and she's now comfortable speaking about it, or she may have just been attacked. Our collective provides support to women who are currently being prostituted, women who are trafficked into prostitution, women who are trying to escape prostitution, and women who are no longer in prostitution but still struggle with its long-lasting emotional and physical impacts. We provide support to women who've been assaulted by johns, by pimps, by men pressuring them into prostitution. And some of the support we offer to women in prostitution includes immediate support on the crisis line when faced with a situation of violence, housing in our safe shelter, accompanying women to the police if she'd wish to make a report, and accompanying women to get medical attention at the hospital, and/or helping them get into recovery or treatment programs for substance abuse. Women in prostitution will also call us to help meet their basic physical needs like food, rent, clothing, transportation, utility bills. We view prostitution as a form of male violence against women, and we wish to abolish it. Our analysis and commitment to ending prostitution is derived from and reinforced by what the women who call our crisis line and those who've been a member of our group tell us about their experiences. Many of the women who call our crisis line tell us that they are coerced into prostitution because of violence, poverty, and addiction. Of the women in prostitution who call us, 24% are 15 years old or younger when they entered. They didn't consider prostitution to be their career, but rather something they had to resort to. However, regardless of the age of entry, we see that women carry with them the trauma of what they experienced long after exiting. The primary request of 45% of the women in prostitution who call our crisis line is finding safe shelter. This reflects the need for safety from a pimp or a john, the lack of means to rent a place, or the need of support from other women. Women will call us for support groups or counseling, and 27% of the calls are for support looking into exiting supports. While all women are vulnerable to male violence, the rate of victimization for racialized women is even greater. Indigenous women are only 3% of Vancouver, yet they make up 27% of the women in prostitution who call us. Black women are only 1.2% of the women in Vancouver, but they make up 14% of the women who call us. In 10% of the cases, the mother of a woman who's in prostitution is the first to reach out to us. In another 10% of the cases, a female friend of the woman in prostitution asks us for support in taking her to seek medical care after being injured by a John or for attempting to end her life. In other cases, a woman who is a stranger to the woman in prostitution sees her on the street injured or undressed or in distress and will call us to get her connected to us. 65% of the women in prostitution who call us are dependent on substances. Women tell us that they were first dependent on drugs, most often as a coping response to past sexual violence, and turned to prostitution as a way to pay for the drugs. Other women tell us that they started using drugs or alcohol frequently as a way to cope with the experience of being in prostitution. Some women have disclosed that they cannot engage in prostitution without using substances. Women have told me that they're offered drugs and alcohol by their Johns. 48% of the women who call us reveal being controlled or coerced by a pimp. We have also observed that pimps sustain their power over women with physical violence or by facilitating or maintaining their addiction. In recent years, we've received calls from women who have other employment and have university degrees, who saw prostitution as an appealing option because of how it's normalized by the mainstream media and the public discourse, not only as legitimate, but as a good way to make money. I've worked with 2 women who entered prostitution because they weren't receiving enough hours at work and needed money quickly to pay their rent. One woman was a nurse and the other was a teacher. Both women were quick to leave prostitution because in their very first experience with a John, they were raped. These women told us that the sex trade industry was not what they thought it would be. The notion of lucrative, easy money while maintaining personal autonomy over the conditions was quickly shattered. In addition to our frontline work, we are also pushing for reforms in relation to violence against women, but prostitution in general. Last year, we formed the Women's Equality Coalition to intervene in the constitutional challenge to Canada's current prostitution laws, led by pro-prostitution lobbyists. The Canadian Criminal Code provision subject to this challenge criminalizes those who buy sexual services, third parties who advertise or receive material benefits from those selling sex, and those who groom and recruit women and girls into prostitution. It's important to note that women and other vulnerable people who sell their own sexual services are not criminalized. We argue that the importance of this law as a form of deterrence and discouragement for men from exploiting and profiting off of women. We are arguing that the equality, liberty, and security of women cannot be advanced or secured if men are granted a constitutional right to purchase women's bodies. We also reject the pro-prostitution argument to the court that if all aspects of prostitution are legal and not criminalized, it'll be safer for women because they'll be able to screen the men. There is absolutely no way to make prostitution safer. The idea that women can screen men for potential violence is just an illusion. We know that women are most often assaulted, sexually assaulted, and killed by men who they knew and whom they've screened for months or years, whom they are in intimate relationships with. Saying that there's a way to make prostitution safer is only glamorizing the industry and giving girls and women the false sense that they have some control, that they get to set the terms. I recently spoke to a young woman who called her crisis line after a John took off a condom, even though she explicitly told him he can't do that, and when she got upset, he refused to pay her. Last year, in an extensive consultation with our callers, our past residents, and our allies, we developed a set of 45 feminist demands to end male violence against women that articulates immediate actions that the state can take. Instead of leaving women to individually solve their economic vulnerability through prostitution, we are calling for safe, affordable, and long-term housing to women, Financial support, a guaranteed livable income to protect women from resorting to prostitution and allowing women to exit. Women need a guaranteed livable income that meets adequate standards of living. It must be provided unconditionally, without a means test, without a job search requirement, without wait times, and regardless of marital status or immigration status. Women-only detox and recovery services for substance abuse should be available on demand. Treatment centers need to have an understanding of women's particular experiences of addiction and its connection to male violence. The criminal justice system must also enforce our current laws and criminalize the men who sell, buy, and profit from the sexual exploitation of women in prostitution. Men who rape, batter, harass, and rob women in prostitution must also be criminalized. The choice of a few or some doesn't justify the exploitation of so many, specifically those who are the most oppressed, which are Indigenous women, women of color, and poor women. We cannot ignore the many of those who are not there by choice. Women are not products to be purchased, and purchased consent is not freely given consent. Prostitution reduces women to commodities, and the prostitution industry in Canada and around the world is sexist, racist, and classist, and it legitimizes male violence against women and other forms of inequality in the pursuit of economic profit. Prostitution is both a cause and consequence of women's inequalities.
Thank you, Sonam. I just want to add a couple of words about this this very manipulative argument that legal prostitution allows women to make screening. This is often discussed among survivors, activists, and different platforms. So first, we cannot screen out dangerous men, not even our dates. We don't depend financially on a date, and we cannot screen them properly, not always. And in prostitution, it is much harder. And one more thing that I always say, and it was also very well argumented at the Nordic Model Now conference a week ago, let's imagine that some sex buyers are screened out and they are not accepted by some women in prostitution. They're just going to more desperate women, to weaker women, women who have no support networks among other women in prostitution, victims of trafficking. The violent sex buyers are going somewhere. They don't disappear. So if we want a safe world for survivors, for women, there should be no sex buyers. Our next speaker is Myles Sanchez from the Philippines. She was a trafficked child and became a survivor leader. She assists women in street prostitution. She helps them to exit prostitution. So thank you for coming here, Myles.
Good day, everybody. We in the Empowered Women Survivors Collective, or EWSC, member of Coalition Against Trafficking in Women, Asia Pacific, or CATWAP, are happy to be invited here. We are based in the Philippines with 1,072 members. I am so happy also to hear from sisters, victim survivors of prostitution, rape, and other form of sexual violence in different parts of the world. Our group is currently active in organizing and implementing a comprehensive empowerment program for our peer survivors, victims of prostitution and various forms of violence against women with the help of CATWAP. There are no social conditions that can ever make prostitution a job. We in a WSC and other survivors group in the Philippines, such as Bagong Kamalayan or New Consciousness, Buklod, or Unite, the first survivors group in the Philippines, formed around the Philippines, around the former U.S. military bases, and the Lawig Bubay, are united in the stand of prostitution is not sex and not work. Is that why with the leadership of Coalition Against Trafficking in Women, Asia Pacific, we push for an anti-trafficking law that criminalizes the buyers and the businesses in prostitution, but will protect the support of survivors. Because of our hard work for more than 10 years, we passed the anti-trafficking law in the Philippines in 2003 that addresses the demand, while the old revised penal code from Spanish colonizer punishes victims. We educate state officials, both national and local, that the anti-trafficking law supersedes the old revised penal code and the latter should not be used. When the police still use the old law, CATW and EWSC rescue the victim survivors even at night or at dawn. And we warn the laws enforcer that they will be charged. Just this year, on July 23, 2022, we have removed all laws in the Philippines punish victims through the expanded Anti-Trafficking Act through the effort of Coalition of CATWAP under the leadership of Ms. Jean Enriquez. We work for the change of law because of our experiences and because we believe that as long as there is prostitution, our vision of safe place for all will never happen. Our vision of gender inequality will not become a reality. In passing the law, EWSC and CATWAP asserted the following. One, before the anti-trafficking law was passed, the media and law enforcer focused on the women as criminals, and their stigmatization persists to this day, which has led to suicide and other such fatal harms to women. Because of our good law, the women are now supported to heal and self-organize. Before the anti-trafficking law was passed, we could not use any law against those who sexually exploit us in prostitution and those who have abused us as commodities. We can only imagine that it is worse country that explicitly legalize or decriminalize prostitution. We know from CATWAP's information that legalization only increased the trafficking to place where it become acceptable. Similar to site of the former U.S. military bases where the PIMS culture is already integrated and has become profitable for the local governments. But because our law criminalizes prostitution, we are able to conduct trainings in these areas to change the pimp culture. Poverty is not justification to legalize or decriminalize prostitution. If it is legalized, our only promotion will be to become pimps or to die. It is our right to have real works with dignity, to have option. It is our rights to demand from the state. That is why we post our law. If we accept such economic conditions as justification for legitimizing prostitution, we remove the responsibility from the government to protect our rights, to be free from violence, to create local jobs with dignity, which is also the call of the labor movement in the Philippines. We continue to push economic option for women. Legalizing prostitution endangered our children, especially the children of women in prostitution, to consign the sex industry. In the Philippines, we continue to strengthen the law to ensure that both children and women are protected. Legalizing or decriminalizing prostitution increased the demand. Before our anti-trafficking law, sex tourism was tolerated. In contrast, because we now have a good law in the Philippines, much has changed in the police when they were formally given the training on the anti-trafficking law. They have partnered with NGOs such as CATWAP to promote that buying women in prostitution is a crime. They placed banner on the street of Quezon City in the Philippines, and in the establishment about the law and penalties. Pamphlets were distributed to communities, which were also a big help. We built Bantay Bugaw or Pimp Watch mechanism in trafficking hotspot around the countries and prevented prostitution from the source area. Together with the local government, we trained hotel workers to report Prostitution Act by buyers and businesses. Before the anti-trafficking law was passed, women had no help in terms of health. Our members suffered from tuberculosis, cancer. I am also a cancer survivor. HIV complication. But because the law is on our side, we have to recovery and reintegration program for traffic person at the regional level, which we are able to access with the help of CATWAP. We will continue to educate our people on the anti-trafficking law to change the culture all over the country and the world, as this is harmonized with the UN protocol on trafficking that we fought for. Because trafficking only happens when prostitution is tolerated. And we cannot tolerate prostitution because it is not work. We are not sex worker. We will never accept that prostitution is a part of women's fate, or cannot be avoided. It is social constructed. We will continue to fight prostitution because its continuation support patriarchy. If it is legalized, then it will be harder to fight patriarchy and engendered rape and all form of violence, discrimination, and inequality. No place will be safe for women and children. We will never win in the legalization or decriminalization of sex industry. Only capitalism and patriarchy will. Pharmaceutical will continue to profit from our illnesses. Neoliberal academic will get grant from promoting the neoliberal ideas that women wanted this as individual rights. Government will take the easiest route of taxing and not creating jobs to change the economic and political system. Men will continue women as solely bodies, properties, objects, and commodities. While we champion our anti-trafficking law, we continue to post a law that will increase the support services for the survivor and increase accountability of the demand side. In the recent month, we filed complaint about police officer raping in women in prostitution in exchange for their lives in their partner, in exchange for crossing the border during the pandemic-related lockdown. CATWAP also helped a lot providing training to women survivors, victims, and becoming an advocate. The training provided by CATWAP are a great help to regain self-confidence and return to their dreams. From June 2021 to present, the leader of our group have been co-selected as online support group per facilitator because since pandemic, more and more women are victims of online prostitution and online sexually abuse of women and youth, girls and boys. This program of CATWAP is a big help because there are more victim survivors who are helped not within the Philippines, because we have compatriots who contact us that they have been abused by their employers, or also been involved in prostitution in the other countries or other cities in the Philippines that we cannot go. Currently, there are 1,393 victims of various forms of violence against women and young women and men that we have assisted, and some of them are lesbian and bisexual. Some of the perpetrators convicted because when the victims approach us, we immediately assist her and ask if she is ready to sue her perpetrator. Because women are more victims of abuse, are afraid to file a case because many of them have experienced discrimination or blaming. Some of the perpetrators got bail because they have relatives of local official, and some are government officials who can bend the law. So we are very grateful to Ms. Ingen Enriquez because she helped us to get up and become a strong survivor and guided us continue healing and our work to help fellow victim survivor. She and Katwap are reason why we are survivor now, and we are able to help 1,000 more survivor. Some of us out as HIV positive, while also victim survivors of prostitution and judicial killings. And these are powerful messages to the public. And I am also a victim of extrajudicial killing. All my family were killed. My brother, my sister, my 2 uncles, and other relatives. We are enjoined by CATWAP and multi-sectoral organization campaign for human rights defense against neoliberal globalization, against militarism, for environmental activists and other related issues, because all of this aggravate prostitution. We need the social movement to address the roots causes including patriarchy. As the Philippines is now under the leadership of the former dictator's son, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., poverty, worsen, and killing continues. Because of this, more women and children will be vulnerable to prostitution. But we will persist together with CATWAP and allied social movement. Currently, many of our members have returned to school in elementary, high school, college, and I am one of them. We return to our childhood dream because no woman dreamed that she would grow up to become a prostitute. Prostitution is criminal and should remain to recognize, such as for killing women and convening with a private interest to profit from the abused women and children. Solidarity to all my sisters. Thank you so much.
Okay, our next speaker is Chelsea Geddes, a brilliant sex trade survivor and an activist from New Zealand, a country known for its decriminalized brothels.
I'm a survivor of 20 years experience in the New Zealand sex industry. New Zealand's full decriminalisation model is often pointed to as the best and most progressive prostitution reform law and policy by some. The criminalisation of prostitution, we are told, being the root cause of associated exploitation and harm. On the flip side, decriminalised prostitution is being aggressively marketed to young girls as sex work, as an equal exchange between consenting adults, as harmless fun for men, and even as empowering for women. I remember reading advertisements for strip club and brothel workers when I was a child in my early teens. They were in the normal jobs section of the newspaper. These ads stood in stark contrast to the rest of the jobs on the page. The Showgirls Club in my city of Auckland advertised for bikini dancers, saying you get to keep your bikini on and make a lot of tips. No experience or dancing skills were required, just easy money. Femme Fatale, the largest and most well-known brothel in Auckland and indeed the whole country, advertised for women to massage and rub shoulders with friendly gentlemen. No experience required. They boasted a pay rate of up to $2,000 per shift, saying they prefer to see themselves as a stepping stone to bigger and better things. All other jobs in the newspaper did not compare. They required qualifications, experience, and offered up far less money. But the strip club was not glamorous or classy, and people were not shoving tons of money at me. I began tabletop dancing in my little outfits with heavy makeup for drunken, rude, handsy men, waving cigarettes which burned my bum, and they asked for private dances. As it turns out, you don't make any money bikini dancing and keeping your bikini on. You had to go into a small room with these guys with no witnesses and take all your clothes off to get money. It was the same for all the other girls. And since you're doing that now, you also have to dance on stage for a crowd and get naked there too. The only instruction received was dance for 3 songs and be naked by the end. The management were demanding they took 20% of all money earned and paid no wage. The men were worse. They would hold out a $1 showgirls bill and ask, "What'll you do for this?" after I'd just danced naked in front of them. What more could they possibly want before handing over $1 measly dollar? They would assault girls by sticking a finger up them while on stage, putting their hands on their breasts, spiking girls' drinks, and rape only narrowly avoided. I had savings goals, so I left and went to Femme Fatale to rub shoulders with friendly gentlemen, earn $2,000 a shift, and have a stepping stone to bigger and better things. They were 12-hour shifts. The men paid $250. The club took their cut of $150. Then the club charged me a $40 shift fee, a $40 advertising fee, and $20 for condoms and lube, making the first booking of the night a freebie for which I was paid nothing. This is standard. There weren't any friendly gentlemen. These were rapists. Even accepting that you had to have sex, they constantly pressured and forced more. They rip condoms off, they try to kiss you and shove their tongue down your throat. They viciously bite necks and nipples, smack and swear at you. They ask for discounts. They want to do it twice, 3 times, 4 times, but they don't want to pay twice, 3 times, or 4 times. I read some literature produced by the New Zealand's Prostitutes Collective, supposedly our workers' union, but who never once led any action to raise our pay rates. The first impression they gave me was if we, the prostituted, could convince the men that we were professionals, providing a service like any other job, that they would treat us better, that there would no longer be stigma, and that stigma is what caused the harms we experienced. This does not work. Being polite, professional, and getting the job done efficiently means the men complain that you were clinical and want their money back. Clinical is apparently unacceptable because this is not a clinic, I was not a health professional, and these people were not looking to buy a service like any other job. They were looking to sexually harass, rape, abuse, violate, and degrade attractive young women, and they paid to get away with it. I was to be dominated by men, and they were going to do whatever they wanted to me, while I struggled to uphold a modicum of health and safety, protect myself from injury, and hold on to my dignity. During this constant battle, I was to humour and lie to these men that they were somehow interesting and that we weren't completely disgusted by them. Especially when they would say things purposely to upset us, I just had to not let them see that it got to me, even if it did. They're on some power trip. That is what they come in for. And with all these complaints, I was still the #1 rated lady on Femme Fatale's website for years and had to deal with my share of stalkers. Taking a taxi home as a safety precaution, but being sexually assaulted by the taxi drivers themselves, likely due to where they had picked me up from. On a busy shift, I might have 7 or 8 bookings, making my genitals red, raw, and swollen. No one was earning $2,000 a shift. And at the end of the night, when we are paid out, there was no guarantee they'd hand over our money. They might write on an envelope that they owe us X amount of dollars, so we have to come in and work another shift to get it. Sometimes it built up for a long time, and I worried if I'd be paid at all. Ugly, smelly, fat, drug-addled men pounded away on top of me, dripping cold sweat onto my skin and in my eyes. I got ear infections because I would turn my head so they couldn't try and kiss me, and they would pant moisture into my eardrum instead. All you can do is continue to firmly state your boundaries while trying not to make them angry. If they are in any way displeased that you didn't do all that they wanted, they can demand their money back and you will not be paid at all. Some men were easier compared to others, but they were all ultimately the same. My human rights to bodily integrity, safety, free expression, to not endure torture had been sold. The brothel streams porn to the rooms, which encouraged the men to pressure us for any number of bizarre, dangerous, unhygienic, and degrading acts against our bodies, because they're seeing those other poor girls experience them on screen. Doing maths in my head helped distract me from thinking about what was happening. So I would count how many hours I'd booked so far, how much money I'd made minus fees, what I planned to buy when I left, how much more I needed, how many more bookings that is. Without being noticed, I'd glance at my watch and count down the minutes. I would go home to bed with visions of 100 men's faces morphing into each other in front of my eyes, hovering over me, and I'd be jolted awake by them. I would kick and punch in my sleep. When I stayed at a friend from the brothel's place after we'd finished a shift, I saw that she did it too. In New Zealand brothels, under decriminalisation, women are told they are independent contractors and responsible for paying their own tax. But they aren't given any independent contractor freedoms. You don't get to choose the rate charged for you. You don't get to choose when or where you will work or who you will see. If you were thought to be working on your own without the brothel taking a cut, they will fire you or steal money from your pay. When I was at another brothel called 133, the management deducted hundreds of dollars from my pay for smoking a cigarette in a car in the car park, even though the car belonged to another girl from the club and she and I were just sitting in it because it was raining. Women in brothels will be treated like employees, except they won't get any employee rights, no ACC, no reliable wage, no sick leave, maternity leave or pension, nothing. Under full decriminalisation, police can't help anyone. I've gone to the police station after being punched in the head and concussed by a large man who was verbally abusing a young new girl in the lounge. She was sitting there looking terrified. So I told him to leave her alone. He laughed and asked me, "Do you want to die?" So I took a step closer and said yes. The police station is just around the corner from the brothel, so with my spinning head, I and a few of the girls walked over and told them about the attack. He had also stolen my purse. They didn't do a single thing. They just sent us away, told me to look in the public rubbish bins to see if he'd thrown my purse in one. My best friend was overdosed with GHB by a man who booked her. Then he overdosed himself. When they were both discovered unconscious, the manager cried because my best friend wasn't breathing, but she wouldn't call an ambulance in case they sent police too. The boss's apparent number one rule is no police ever, the mark of any truly legitimate businessman. Luckily, one of the other girls called an ambulance anyway. My friend died in the ambulance but was resuscitated twice. There was a small mention in the news with no details and a response from NZPC. Hope everyone feels better in the morning. Never mind that the brothel policy would have ended with dead bodies if it was followed. Never mind that my best friend was discharged from the critical care ward in the afternoon to be beaten by her boyfriend for it. Never mind that she remains trapped in prostitution to this day, addicted to heroin to ease the pain. New Zealand is rife with gang activity, and gang members frequent all of Auckland's brothels. They specifically target prostituted women to get them addicted to methamphetamines so that they can make money off of their abuse of prostituted women by selling them drugs for more money than they pay to rape them. The government and police are doing nothing about it. Decriminalised prostitution also negatively impacts prostituted women in ways unrelated to the prostitution itself. When I had briefly left prostitution to pursue a relationship with a man, he physically assaulted me by strangulation up against a wall during an argument because I had refused to dress up slutty and be degraded for him. I had a mini stroke 2 days later, surely caused by the event, and a massive handprint bruise on my neck. In court, after police pressed charges, my ex had come up with a story to excuse the strangulation. The story was that I was some kind of sexual deviant who had wanted to be strangled during sex. He was able to bring up my history and prostitution as evidence that I was a sexual deviant and to paint me in this light in front of the entire courtroom. I was not, however, allowed to bring up any of his previous charges I had found out about from police for domestic violence against his previous partners, and I was not allowed to bring up that he had violated his conditions after arrest by stalking me and drinking and had spent the past few days in remand. If past crimes are not allowed to be mentioned in courtrooms, then it's precisely because prostitution is decriminalised in New Zealand that he could use it as ammunition against me in court. He was found guilty by the jury, but sentenced to only 3 months home detention. I could have died, and if I had and was not there to defend myself against these outrageous allegations, he might have got away with it entirely. The prostitution industry already has the abused, the homeless, the addicted, and disenfranchised in their grips. And now female students have the sex industry's target on their back. They're young and attractive, and they are financially strapped at a point in life where they seek to break away from family and gain a new independence. Plus, they're ambitious. The sex industry's propaganda machine knows just how to exploit this and could potentially derail a whole generation of women's success, snatching young women on the brink of greatness, capable of forging real careers in fields they're interested in and have talent for, stealing them away from all that to serve male orgasms. It's somewhere between hard and impossible to succeed at university while working until 6 a.m. under these conditions, switching back and forth from being awake all day to being awake all night, not making friends at uni because you can never go out when invited on Friday or Saturday nights, as these are the money-making nights. Doing drugs with gang members because you'd rather sit there doing that and keep them talking than have to get on top of them. However long you originally planned to be in prostitution, you'll be stuck there longer. This is something even the NZPC admit. Over this time, you will not be gaining any real-world job skills or experience. You will not be advancing or getting promotions. You will miss out on the life you deserve to be living in safety, financial security, with lots of friends and healthy relationships. It is no stepping stone to bigger and better things. Common experience when it comes to exiting prostitution is a feeling of sunken costs. When you have suffered so much already, how can you leave before achieving anything from it? Without that degree, without that house, what would you even do? How would you explain your absence from the workforce for so long in a job interview? Integrating back into society is not an easy task, and the job seeker benefit is not designed to sustain life for any great length of time. That's not what it's for, and you cannot survive that way. There is no access to justice against buyers and pimps under decriminalisation, and there are no exit or support services. The sex industry lures in girls, and full decriminalisation policies trap them there. I forked out a pretty penny to find psychological services for the torment I was enduring. I requested someone who wouldn't judge me for being a prostitute. I was paired up with a very friendly woman who said something along the lines of it being a choice and that she thinks we would both agree on that. I didn't respond, I just went quiet, not knowing what to say. In my own time, I thought about what she had said to me. I realised that this is what's being said by the pro-sex work propaganda to facilitate a massive switch of blame from the perpetrators of the abuse onto the victims. The unspoken part of "it's a woman's choice" is, therefore, it's her fault. I had started researching prostitution online, and I was saying online the things I wasn't allowed to express in real life, about my life circumstances and about prostitution. Social media was the only place where I could express the true nature of my experience away from the Johns whose money I was dependent on. This refuge does not exist for many young women in the sex industry today, as prostitution moves increasingly online and women have to pander to John's fantasies, even on their own social media accounts, to drum up business. In my online research, I learned that I meet the criteria in international law under the Palermo Protocol of being a victim of sex trafficking. Of the hundreds of women I met during my years in prostitution, most, if not all of them, meet the criteria too. I've been speaking out against prostitution since around 2009, and I've been fully exited from prostitution since 2021. I wish I could have stood and fought for my country to get the Nordic model of prostitution reform, which reflects the reality of prostitution as sexual abuse and exploitation, holds the abusers, the pimps, traffickers, and buyers criminally responsible, allowing survivors to access justice and provide support services to its victims, rather than gaslighting them into thinking there's something wrong with them because they don't feel empowered when men violate and assault them, while all the advertising is telling us that we should. But I was only 14 at the time of our prostitution reform in 2003, and I'd never heard of the Nordic model. The argument seemed to be whether prostituted women should be criminalised or if prostitution should be decriminalised. It didn't leave room for a third option. I knew I was not a criminal, that I wasn't the one who had ever committed any kind of crime against anyone. So I supported decriminalisation. It just never occurred to me that the system could ever truly be on our side. The NZPC, as an organisation set up specifically to fight for the full decriminalisation model, does not offer up any information about the Nordic model to the prostituted people it claims to serve. Everyone prostituted alongside me who I have spoken to about the Nordic model had never heard of it before. Aside from some worry that they might not be able to earn the money they need when Johns are criminalised and that they might still be stuck, they all agreed it was ultimately the right way to deal with prostitution, and they are cheering me on from back home as I speak here today. While the NZPC continues to hand out insidious new worker kit books, even to underage children, with pages giving tips on how to endure unwanted anal sex, and pages pathologizing any negative effects of sexual abuse as a made-up condition they label sex worker burnout syndrome. This material is being used to groom women and girls into accepting severe abuse. I'm here because I want the people of the UK to see for themselves, to hear the voices of women prostituted under the decriminalisation model. Please don't let your government make the same mistake New Zealand did.
Our last speaker is someone you know and love, an author, a journalist, and a tireless feminist, Julie Bindel. One of her book, Pimping of Prostitution, was dedicated exactly to what we are talking about today, prostitution under the different legal systems. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you. Thank you. Those of us that advocate to end the sex trade and locate it within the wider context of male violence, which of course is exactly what it is, are often finding ourselves reassuring people that we do not hate men. I fucking hate them. I'm telling you now. Right now, those punters, those pimps, I would make them swallow battery acid, then I would shoot them in the head. How dare they? How dare they? And how dare their supporters, often in their ivory towers of academia, tell us sex work is work and that the inside of a woman's body is a suitable workplace, because they will never have to do it. And I had the privilege of meeting you when I came to New Zealand, madly for 24 hours, to meet you and to go out on the streets and to see this idyllic change in culture since decriminalisation. That was in 2015, right? Yeah. And when I was there, I saw a woman prostituting from a Zimmer frame. And I thought she was at least in her 70s. She was 40. She was that disabled through men's abuse. And I saw other things, such as the application form that you are required as a potential brothel owner to fill in to have a totally legitimate brothel. And it is exactly half the length of the form I once filled in to adopt a dog from Battersea Rescue Centre. 1 page. These academics will have you believe, and remember, their so-called research gets on the front pages of the newspapers that people that know no better digest, They would have us believe that blanket decriminalisation of the sex trade, as we've heard laid out in its full horror, would, for example, reduce new cases of HIV within a decade by about 40%. The truth is, more prostitution, more rape of women, more HIV, more misery, more death, more male entitlement. The language. What on earth are they thinking of, calling the men that we've just heard describe, those that pay to rape women, as clients? What word is that? What word is manager for brothel owner? How on earth can you unionize an industry that is built on the sexual harassment of women when that's the main job of unions for their female workforce? Every single man that thinks they have a right to invade a woman's body, because they're not paying for sex, they are paying to abuse that woman, and as Chelsea has said, to not be arrested. Every single one of those men are criminals. They are rapists. And as for the health-funded projects that don't offer exiting services, but hand out condoms and clean needles, have a think about what those prostituted women feel when they turn up to be helped and they're asked, "Is that your boyfriend outside waiting for you?" when he's her pimp and her drug dealer. Imagine how she feels when she's told that she's doing sex work. And that makes me think of my good friend Sabrina Vallis, a formerly prostituted woman from Australia, New Zealand, who is in the brothels that we've just heard describe, under legalisation in Australia, under decriminalisation in New Zealand. When she was 16 years old, she turned up to talk to the pimps at the New Zealand Prostitute Collective to ask how she could get out. She was told, "Oh, don't worry about it, it's just the stigma. Come along to our Friday evening cheese and wine events. You'll soon make friends." And it took her another 20 years to get out of prostitution. They should be in fucking prison. We heard about the so-called human rights organisations, which we just have to, let's cut to the chase, sisters, they're men's rights organisations, right? Amnesty International. So I first heard about their, as it was, underground proposal, which was only distributed amongst staff, in 2013, when a whistleblower from UK Amnesty handed me a document which they hoped to just pass at their AGM, not to send out for public vote, as it eventually was, you may remember. And in this document, it wasn't just the whole nonsense about it's a career, it's a job, women choose it. You know, they're using the women as a smokescreen for men's abuse because they want to do it. There was also a section about the clients. And there was some criticism of the fact that many of us want to criminalise these wankers. And it said that if you actually have any kind of deterrence that's linked to the criminal justice system, that is illegal imprisonment and should be challenged by human rights organisations because it's removing his liberty to do what he wishes. And let's make no mistake, every single argument that you hear about women's so-called agency and choice is about men's sex right to do what they wish to women. Quite frankly, I care not at all if there is one woman who is choosing it, who is happy, who has bought a second home in the Cotswolds, who sends her children to private school because she's made so much money from prostitution and she hasn't had a hair on her head harmed. I do not care because she's fine. How dare she, if she really does exist, use her example of a tiny minority, unrepresentative of the millions of other women and girls, how dare she use that to argue that you should legalise paid rape? I am sick of it. And every single time that I'm asked, you're not a sex trade survivor, you're not a sex worker, what gives you the right to speak about this? Well, funny that I was never asked that when I volunteered in a domestic violence refuge or rape crisis centre. I was never asked, was I raped or was I battered? Ever. But all of a sudden this becomes about identity politics. And they've even put it on the ever-growing Pride rainbow. It's now a sexual identity, according to some libertarian gay men and female academics. Not having it. When Human Rights Watch, back when Amnesty International were shrilling for the pimps and the punters and supporting Amnesty to put in place blanket decriminalisation, which they did get through eventually in 2015, I think. Kenneth Roth, the highly paid, white, privileged man who was head of Human Rights Watch at the time, was having a bit of a debate on Twitter about whether this was the right way or not to go. And I'm going to read you what he said. He said, "All want to end poverty, but in the meantime, why deny poor women the option of voluntary sex work?" One of the many replies from feminist activists was from Rachel Moran, who asked, "Roth, wouldn't you say, if a person cannot afford to feed themselves, the appropriate thing to put in their mouth is food, not your cock?" Thank you.